Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. We have an absolutely crazy story coming out of British Columbia over the past 2 days that should be concerning to every single property owner in Canada because if it can happen in Richmond, BC, it can absolutely happen where you live. So, we had this court ruling about a month and a half ago or so called Cowichan Tribes versus Canada, where the judge found that the Cowichan Band Council effectively has Aboriginal title over most of the city of Richmond, despite the fact that it is mostly fee simple land, also known as private property. Now, technically, the ruling was just about Crown land. The problem with those saying this doesn't actually affect your private property, it's just talking about Crown land, is that the Crown is who designated portions of the land as fee simple. It started off as Crown land and then they allowed it to become private property. But because the Crown never legitimately owned it, that means that you don't actually own your own home. Now, no, I don't think the Cowichan tribe is going to steal your home from you, but what this could end up possibly doing is allowing for bands like the Cowichan band to basically take some of your property taxes as revenue to them. And what makes this extra ridiculous is that there's another lawsuit, I believe, from the Musqueam First Nation suing the Cowichan First Nation for claiming it's their land because they also think it's their land. Make it make sense. But we need to read this letter here, and then I also want to talk about some other things related to BC politics because things have been crazy here ever since I got to Victoria yesterday, and you guys need to hear about it. But we will first start off with the screenshot of the letter that the City of Richmond has been putting out to homeowners. It was posted by Jim McMurtry, who is now actually the first 1BC candidate that we have announced. He will be running in the riding of Delta South. So if you like 1BC, who I work for, and Jim McMurtry, check out the website for 1BC in the description below, just 1bc.ca. Check it out. I'll also have it pinned at the top of the comments. So Jim here says, when will they come for your house? City of Richmond is telling homeowners that the status and validity of their ownership is in doubt because a Vancouver Island band said their great grandparents once fished there. And that is not an exaggeration at all. This is actually what this gets into. So we will just read the letter. This is not a troll. This was something that the city itself put out. Remember, pretty much every city government in British Columbia is going to be pretty woke. So this is what a woke liberal government, or at least tolerant of woke ideas type government, put out to its own homeowners because suddenly this all became very real and we can no longer afford to be culturally sensitive because now we're talking about home ownership. It says here, notice to registered owner. Please take note that recent BC Supreme Court decision of Cowichan Tribes versus Canada 2025 BCSC 1490 made some very important decisions which could negatively affect the title to your property. A briefing note prepared by the City of Richmond staff is attached for your reference. If you look at the draft map attached to the briefing, your property is located within the claimed area outlined in green. For those whose property is in this area outlined in black, the court has declared Aboriginal title to your property, which may compromise the status and validity of your ownership. This was mandated without any prior notice to the landowners. The entire area outlined in green is claimed on appeal by the Cowichan First Nations. Given the serious implications of the court decision and the pending appeal, the city is hosting an information session to be held on Tuesday, October 28th, 2025 at 7 p.m. at Richmond City Hall. We hope that you can attend to learn more about this important situation. Now, I actually really like that this is happening in Richmond, BC, not because I have any dislike of the people of Richmond. In fact, I very much like the people of Richmond, BC, because it is a disproportionately Asian Canadian city. And the thing is, what I love most about Asian Canadians is that they do not care about woke nonsense for the most part. Yeah, you'll get some woke politicians from those specific communities in Canada as well, but you're not going to get a lot of Chinese or Korean or Japanese Canadians willing to put up with this, which is the why it may be the perfect place to push back on this court ruling. Whereas if you did this in Victoria, they would probably just go along with it in Victoria. They almost already act in the city like they don't even own their own property. But what this basically is attempting to do is say that whatever you purchased, you didn't actually purchase because truly 150 years ago, 100 years ago, this may have been potentially a Cowichan fishing village. Now, the Musqueam dispute that. They say it could have also been theirs, so it's just horseshoes at this point. We don't know who owns anything, and this is also not how government should be run. Now, I was going to go through and show you what people like the BC Attorney General Nikki Sharma had said about this, or even the Premier David Eby had said about this, but they truly didn't say anything on social media. Now, they've talked to the media when they've been hounded by this. I was just in the legislature today, and they had multiple MLAs, including our one BC leader, Dallas Brody, asking them questions on why they seem to be throwing the case. And they're not really messaging on this issue because they're not doing a very good job on it. They've effectively let the Cowichan win because they're not actually arguing in court for the legal extinguishment of Aboriginal title. Because if you don't argue for extinguishment, you're basically saying that any vague ownership that someone had at any time back in history can now apply today, even though there's no real legal records to prove that somebody was in use of an area that they could actually claim to have ownership. It doesn't matter. If someone told a story that they were once in an area, that is now equally valid to you who live in your house currently. Someone may have wanted to use this as a fishing village back in the day, is now basically of equal value to the fact that you and your family live on that property and you like to play soccer with your 6-year-old kid in the backyard. It's absolutely ridiculous. This is not how law should work. It is the undermining of Canada to just have horseshoe law like this where, things don't really matter all that much. What really matters is social justice before, actual justice, that you own the things that you own and that we're not going to go back to the fossil record to determine who really, really owns it. It's foolish. But now I need to talk about some other things that happened today because BC politics is a complete clown show right now. And yet another person has left the BC Conservative caucus. Now, if this was the only person to leave the BC Conservative caucus, I'd actually be congratulating John Rustad because they were one of the worst MLAs in the entire caucus and they're not conservative at all. But this person's not leaving out of a principled reason. They're just leaving because they actually were always a secret liberal that John Rustad insisted on being a candidate. And because even John wasn't being liberal enough for her, she's on her way out. Rob Shaw here says, new Penticton Summerlands MLA Amelia Boultbee is quitting the BC Conservative caucus, says John Rustad is handing next election to BC NDP, and, quote, his failed leadership needs to end, unquote, says he's resorting to intimidation to keep caucus from voting against him, calls on him to resign. Now, I can agree with a Boultbee that Rustad should resign. At the same time, Boultbee should have never been in caucus in the first place. She should have never been allowed to run for the Conservatives. She, in fact, started attacking 1BC for holding an event in Penticton, her riding, because we're racist and phobic of some sort. She's a woke scold who the party simply ran because she was friends with their former chief of staff. It's so stupid, the kind of decisions that the BC Conservatives make and why they make them. I now need to go to the next part of this, where John Rustad responded to Boultbee leaving in, honestly, is kind of a funny response. Like, if he just became like some sort of roast comedian like this, maybe I'd like John better. I love because Boultbee attacked John for having a problem with women, which is just stupid. He doesn't have a problem with women. He's just a bad leader. And it just so happens that out of the 5 people who have left, 4 of them are women. Dallas Brody and Tara Armstrong of the 1BC party would never make that argument because it's stupid. But Boultbee's a woke scold, so she always makes a woke scold argument. But I love how John, in this press conference, surrounds himself with 4 female MLAs because he's actually so pathetic. He has to try and respond to Amelia's criticism by surrounding himself with women. See, I don't have a problem with women. But his actual response is funnier than just that. He then says here, Rob Shaw says, new. After losing his fifth MLA, John Rustad refuses to resign. Instead, he accuses Amelia Boultbee of not being supportive of caucus positions, such as EDU changes due to Soji. Also says she supports Hamas, says he had heard complaints from people in her riding about her. And then it goes on to say, Rustad says Boultbee has had mental health issues in the past, says he is concerned about her current well-being, faces questions on if he has a problem with female MLAs after four more have departed caucus. Now that's really funny for multiple reasons. One, the mental health thing is kind of funny because Boltby frankly probably made up a story about how people threw rocks at her house. Like multiple vehicles pulled up and several individuals threw rocks at her house after our 1BC event had gone on. I can tell you it didn't happen. The communication staff of the BC Conservative Party have never been able to get her to send photos of the apparent damage from people hucking rocks at her house and her car because she probably made it up. And so I like that John's effectively admitting that when he and other conservative MLAs said, "Oh, that's so concerning, someone attacked your house," that they probably knew she was lying the entire time. She's like the Jesse Smollett of BC politics. You know, a bunch of people ran over to her house and chucked rocks, and then they threw a noose over her head and splashed her with bleach and said, "This is one BC country," and ran off into the night. But whatever, you know, that's its own thing. And then she says she supports Hamas. That's not actually untrue. In fact, it's nice to know that John reads my feed because I was the one who went after her for being insane and saying that what Israel was doing in Gaza, i.e., fighting Hamas, was the worst thing since the Holocaust. It's the worst like the worst war crime since the Holocaust. Okay. Not only is Israel fighting Hamas and civilian casualties have basically been guaranteed from Hamas refusing to surrender, hiding behind civilians and putting a lot of their artillery and rockets around hospitals and schools, but even if that stuff wasn't true, and it absolutely is true, Israel's not trying to murder civilians. If they wanted to, the casualties would be way higher than they are because they've been, in fact, trying to be very meticulous in a very tough situation. Urban combat is almost impossible not to take civilian casualties in. And they have kept the ratio very low compared to basically every other conflict in human history. But even if they were attacking civilians, my goodness, even if they were killing all those people deliberately, you don't know about other war crimes that have been committed since World War II that far outscale this, even if they were attempting to commit war crimes, which again they are not. The Cambodian genocide, Rwanda, stuff that happened in the Korean War, Vietnam War, Afghanistan War. Like I could keep going. The stuff in Libya, in the Middle East, Syria, Yemen. What are we talking about? Iran? She doesn't know about other war crimes that have happened in human history? The Iran-Iraq war? Do you not think there was war crimes all over the place? She's just out of her mind. And so I'm not actually that shocked to see her move on. And I'm going to have to give you guys more updates about what's happening in BC. So today we have John Rustad pretending that he cares about the implications of this Cowichan decision that's undermining people's property rights on the same day that his party is voting for something called Bill 27, which is like the miscellaneous something act or whatever, which part of it allows for more meetings involving Indigenous people on a municipal level to be in camera, meaning that they're behind closed doors and you don't get to know what's going on. They voted for that, or they're at least saying they're voting for it. Last time I was watching the legislative live feed like 5 minutes ago. It's all just so stupid. Anyways, well, if you're in British Columbia, consider voting for and joining the 1BC party. We're still a few years away from an election, but obviously there needs to be somebody standing up for common sense in this province. And the only way that we're actually going to make sure that the common sense is represented and even make the Conservatives more normal if there is a party to their right forcing them to be more normal or ceding more support over to us, so at the very least there's a conservative option on the ballot. Anyways, so with all that being said, thank you guys for watching. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys all later.